The fuck did you just say, Seth?
We don't care what you look like. We don't care who you voted for, who you worship, who you love. If you want rule, there's one thing I can promise you, so help me God. Someone else will raise your sons and daughters.
So this evening we have Ayesha Khan, PhD virologist from University of Texas. Thank you for joining us, Ayesha.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to have you on. I heard about a friend Parlo actually told me about you, and he referred me to one of your posts, and I was reading it, and I was like, he was like, yeah, you should message her, and I was like, okay, and luckily you answered. I'm very happy that you did, because we've been kind of trying to branch out more into international history and movements and such, and I think it is a very vital conversation. They're very vital conversations to have, so I'm very glad to have you on. And
happy to be here.
So let's start. Who is Ayesha Khan? Who is the woke scientist?
Actually, I changed that handle. It's a funny story. I changed that handle like a week ago or something very recently, because I posted about Kashmir and Palestine and just the intersectionality between those two movements. And I got a lot of hate for it, which is kind of something that's pretty common, like activists and grassroots organizers are pretty used to that. So that woke scientist handle literally emerged out of me trying to avoid, like entire accounts sending people my way to like shut me down. But that made me think about like my positionality, I guess, in these issues, and why woke scientist kind of embodies, what I'm doing, but like reclaiming the word woke, because it's also been watered down. But so I'm an infectious diseases scientist, and like right now I'm working on COVID-19 testing, and that's because I'm a clinical microbiologist. So that means I specialize in the diagnosis of infectious diseases. That includes, testing. And at the same time, though, I've done for the last 9 or 10 years grassroots organizing in several different movements, both, like you talked about, a lot of very international global movements that expand on issues that we deal with here, like structural racism, but then take it, from America to connecting to struggles across the ocean. And that largely is because of my background. I was born in India, so I'm from South India, but I grew up there for a few years. At the age of 5, around, I moved out, and then since then, my parents moved to a different country every couple of years, and that allowed me to, I guess, see a lot of different cultures, predominantly in the Middle East and the Gulf. And I lived in like Russia for 3 years. So I had this like really wild perspective on, I guess, infectious diseases, because they're a manifestation of inequity everywhere, right? And coming to the U.S., I only came here for my education. So I got here for college. I went to UCLA, and that was the first time I've come to the United States. Yeah, and well, I mean, I visited before, like a while back, family for a few days, I think. And then that was like the one time that I came back again and to live here. And actually this has been the most stable, like however long, 9 years or 8 years of my life, because I was moving around so much. But I guess that kind of describes my intersectionality and like solidarity perspective on global movements.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome.
Can you like compare and contrast like the different cultures that you're exposed to? Like, what did you like pick up from them that like helped shape your political like ideology or view?
Yeah. Well, one, I grew up with a very limited understanding of my own community to the full extent of it, because of that mobility that never gave me a strong connection to what I considered like homeland. And that also led to a sense of like removal from my own identity. So I don't think I ever felt like I belonged anywhere. And the mobility around the Middle East, I'm Muslim, so I think that connected with that one part of my identity. But at the same time, I grew up in Gulf countries, right, where you have a active, what is called the kafala system, or the active like slave system of bringing migrant workers from, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, or like the Philippines, et cetera. And then, using them for migrant labor where they have very limited rights. And those people, were my people. And I think that's when I really started to try to understand what our community was going through. I think my parents kind of kept me away from a lot of it. When I was younger in India, I don't think I understood a lot of what Indian minorities go through and what my positionality in society was as an Indian Muslim. I think they made me feel like we were just leaving because we were just going to go, have better opportunities, not that we were fleeing, religious persecution. And I think that embodies like the resilience of our communities, right? Like that's the kind of stuff that we have to put up against, and that's how we protect our children. And I think that's the kind of intersectional perspective that I grew up with, and I ultimately realized it was collectivism. That's what that was. The deeply ingrained culture of collectivism. And I picked that up regardless of where I was, right? Whether I was in India or Saudi Arabia or like eventually finding my way here, but still finding that in communities of color here, right? And realizing that what made me so unsettled about the United States and white supremacy was individualism, that I felt so wildly uncomfortable by it. And that there was something tying us all together. And I think that made me think about why, if a culture is so deeply ingrained in a particular community and they're so different from each other, there has to be something as powerful as they are resisting the same type of oppression. It has to be, right? That inherently makes you a collective society because that's a mechanism of survival.
Yeah, that is a very beautiful way to put it. And I think that there is, you said it too, there is like that kind of just instills an idea of collectivism coming from, those kinds of issues. And that is very relatable.
So what led you to virology, if I'm saying it correctly?
So I never actually found my way to virology specifically. So in infectious diseases, that's like the big umbrella of any kind of pathogen-related contagious disease, right? Like that's the umbrella of it. And I think since I was in India, I do actively remember that infectious diseases kind of governed our society, right? Like we boiled all our water. That was just something that we did. We boiled all our water. I never drank water out of a tap. You don't do that, right? And there are little things like that. Remembering what it was like to like wait in long lines at public clinics for vaccines. Seeing people have fevers and get sick because they drank bad water and die, right? And like that made me wonder, I can't even see this, and it's killing my people, right? I can't see it. Whatever it is I can't tangibly see what way I can help. And I think that made me really want to understand the science behind microbiology. And eventually, as I traveled, I realized that what infectious diseases was a manifestation of social inequity, right? The communities that that are the poorest, that have the least access to resources and healthcare, and have no clean drinking water, pollutants, right, in their air and water. And hygiene and sanitation is highly problematic. And all of that put together just creates this perfect situation for a emergence of infectious diseases, right? Where being contagious is everything. And we live so closely together because we have nowhere else to go, right? And it's insane. And thinking about the social manifestations of what infectious diseases does to people. And I think it also made me realize that I love science and I love to understand how things work. And like that in itself, right? Like, cause even besides this, like half the other stuff I read for joy and for pleasure is literally like, quantum mechanics and like, trying to understand quantum physics, sorry. And trying to understand how like our universe works and things like that, right? And I just appreciate the science of it, just from like a nerdy ass perspective.
But you did confuse quantum physics and quantum mechanics. I don't know how you could make such a mistake. I
know, that's so funny. Well, because my partner is an engineer, and I was talking about the mechanics part. And I'm making associations in my head right now. I was like, why did I say quantum mechanics? Because that is not related to anything we're talking about.
It's okay. I don't even know what any of that stuff is. I'm not going to lie to you.
You're like, it just sounds like stuff.
It sounds hard. So,
Well, so long story short, I do infectious diseases. I do all sorts of, organisms. It doesn't matter, right? If it's a fungi, if it's a bacteria, if it's a virus. When patients come to the hospital, someone shows up sick and coughing and has a fever. The first thing they do is get a doctor to check them out, right, and report those symptoms. But it's my job to ultimately run tests to figure out what they're infected with, right? Exactly what, and how do we treat it? Like all of that is our job as clinical microbiologists. And I think I'm more fascinated with the bug from the scientific perspective. So we work with infectious diseases physicians to treat patients, but ultimately we're figuring out what's wrong with them.
So I one thing that I think, like something that I'm starting to learn, as I delve more into politics is foreign relations and foreign policy and how things like sanctions affect other countries. And you read about this stuff, but you don't really you don't really contextualize it. So when you read things like sanctions, and that kind of, for me, like it kind of dehumanizes you a little bit because you just read like economic sanctions. But what you're not really understanding is that, or what's not really being conveyed is that people that, like actual citizens that maybe they belong to a country in which our government is having an issue with their government, whatever the case is, but sanctions are literally us either starving them of supplies or medical supplies or like bombing them, destroying electricity, destroying water.
Imperialism and capitalism, right?
Exactly. And that is kind of, that's like a very fascist thing to do. And fascism is not just this brutal oppression of people via the state. It presents itself in many forms. And like individualism, like there's a lot of symbols and imagery and stuff like our current president stoking a lot of white nationalist talking points. And these kind of evoke this sense of like fascist individualism that kind of allow for these sanctions to be done and for so many other countries to suffer, and be so susceptible to infectious diseases, and not even just overseas, but in our country as well.
Oh yeah. Right? Who are the most vulnerable here? It's all because of the same baseline inequity, right? Like what is it? It's power structures. It's all the same, right? And what does it manifest into, right? Always poverty, right? Some kind of structural system where you're depriving these particular communities of access to capitalism, right? True capitalism. And because basically that gets people to understand it's a tool of oppression then. What is it for, right? Because the moment you take it away, people are dying. Right? So what kind of system who does it work for? Right? We can't.
I heard that in Alabama, like there was a few cases of Legionnaire's disease that there was like a small outbreak of it. And I know that Alabama is one of the like least socially funded states in the United States. And isn't Legionnaire disease like something that it was like pretty big back in the day, but we somehow like through modern science that we like got control of it.
Well, and, yeah, I mean, the perfect example of that, yeah, you're right. Like it's something that I think but to us, a lot of those, that's the interesting thing about growing up in a part of the world that, after 20th century colonialism has been identified as developing and then coming here, that a lot of those things are our daily reality. So it's a lot of privilege walking in here and seeing people don't even recognize infectious diseases as this thing that just wipes out communities, right? Because that's what happens to us all the time. And that is why we do not, and excuse my language, but like F around with vaccines and antibiotics. And that's everything to us, right? That's our lifeline. And I think that in itself is like interesting to see now with like Alabama and other locations. But then you also look at California, right? It's not just like poverty and the lack of resources or health inequity, right? Because then you have California and then you have Austin, right? These clusters of very progressive, high, upper middle class at worst, and upper class at best kind of communities, right? Largely white. And we have the biggest outbreaks of measles there, right? Another thing of the past that we were able to sufficiently eradicate with vaccines, and now it's back. Why? Because, again, it's not necessarily related to, like, education or money. It's this weird, I guess, holier than thou almost, where privilege has allowed people to forget what basic necessities are, and how important things like hygiene and sanitation are because it's not a problem here, right? So they forget that these things kill people. They really do. I think it's that level of removal from oppression so removed that they just don't think it's a thing anymore enough to not want vaccines, which to me is horrifying.
That is exactly all the measles outbreaks that we've had in Williamsburg. I think just, describing these people as completely unaware due to their privilege, that is so nail on the head. It's so accurate. It's very true.
So everyone wants to know if COVID could have been could COVID be foreseen instead of just this thing that popped up on us last November? Or was it something that just sprang up on every community, be it politics, science?
No, I mean,
economy?
there's a certain science to this, right? Evolution is a part of the general process of how this world works. Things evolve, and there is a certain level of that happening in the microbial world, and that's exactly what allows for new viruses to emerge regularly, and that's why we can't even have the same flu vaccine every year, because the precise viruses that are causing seasonal flu, those change, right? Which is why we need an entire new formulation of the flu vaccine every year. That's how rapid evolution is, and it's kind of brilliant if you think about it, because they're able to evolve that fast because they're able to make two of them in minutes, right? That's how long that process takes. And every time you double, you evolve, right? You change something about your genetic material, right? You mutate. And we how long does it take for us to double, right? That's exactly the problem, right? Our evolutionary rate is really slow. So we can't adapt to these viruses as easily as they can adapt to us. So they're going around figuring out 1,000 configurations of what might be a useful host to infect, right? And one of those is going to click. It's just that they can evolve a lot faster than us. So it's about that. It's expected. You can't, of course, predict based on baseline mutational rate, how likely will there be a virus to have, particular mutations and things like that. But it's so unpredictable just from a nature of you're dealing with biology. You have no idea. There's a whole randomness, right? This isn't a controlled process. We don't know at the end of the day, right? There's all these things that exist in biology that we don't understand. So in a certain way, you just can't predict it. But what you can do is be ready for it because it's going to happen, right? Pandemics happen, and we know this from history too, right? This is not the first time something sprung up on us. And I think that is important, right? And we don't learn. That's the problem. We don't fundamentally change the way we structured our society based on what we've learned from before, right? But that's everything. That's oppression, right? We don't learn from history. We don't learn
We don't
at
even
all.
teach
Why
history.
the hell would we learn? We don't even teach history. And why the hell would we learn about pandemics and restructure our entire society to actually be prepared for pandemics? That doesn't sound like us at all, you know?
Not at all. Yeah, that's very true. It's funny because one of my friends lives in New Zealand, and he was taunting me because they dealt with COVID. I think in 2 weeks they were done with it. And, of course, in America, we've had it. I remember reading reports about it November, December, and I remember being in Portland in February and freaking out and being like, yo, we're going to be on fucking lockdown forever, aren't we? And then lo and behold, here we are in August.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing though is I think there was a certain element of what was unique about this virus was the scale of it. I think that definitely there's a whole element of surprise and randomness there, right? Because that's a whole other element. You can predict there will be a virus to evolve that causes a pretty bad disease, but not exactly, how high the transmission rate is, right? What is it going to look like when it actually infects people, right? Something that we're understanding now, all these high risks, but then there's cases of kids getting sick. There's cases of healthy people getting sick, and we don't really know why, right? Getting sick, I mean, ICU hospitalizations, right? So it's not just immunocompromised people and older people or people with other comorbidities, right? That predispose them to getting sick. So there's something about it we still don't understand, and that's the problem. That that in itself is really rare, and I think it was different. That the last time we had SARS, right? That was the last 2003 outbreak, and that was the same family of the virus that we're dealing with right now, and that's a close relative, right? And even then, we don't remember, I think, as drastic of scale of things happening. Well, we do remember, I think, a panic, right? I think that whole element of something is happening and markets crashing. And that wave, I think, was still there, right? But what wasn't there was, I think, the state of quarantine that we're in right now. And that was because it inherently wasn't as tragic on like mortality and morbidity as this one is, right? And I think we are responding very much to like how scary this particular virus is. I think that's a direct proportional thing to how the scale of the response globally has been.
I don't know. I'm sorry. This might be a really dumb fucking question, but I don't know if you work in healthcare, right? I'm sure you do. You have to. Like, do you?
Yeah.
You do, right?
Well, yeah. So anything, healthcare is considered anything that involves taking care of patients.
Considering the scale of the virus, do you think? Because I don't quite understand universal healthcare, or at least I don't think that I understand it as much as I think I do, because I've heard plenty of people say things to me that are like kind of make me feel like I'm not as confident in it. So considering the scale of the pandemic and how, more or less unpredictable it's been, and just how we as a nation have just been unable to curb it, be it by our administration or whatever have you, is universal healthcare something that you think is absolutely necessary moving forward?
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know how we would be able to do this without that. I really don't. Like, I don't understand fundamentally how, especially in the middle of something like this, where we can't guarantee people the right to life and guarantee people basic things if you don't have healthcare, you can't even pay for a COVID test, right? And there are some states that are instituting policies now where like everyone can get a test, but that's also governed by politics. Let's remember which those states are, right? Everything. Politics controls everything. And that's what sucks, right? This messed up, like, two-party, honestly, everyone's kind of in the center or the right kind of system. And we think, that's not controlling everything that we do. And it is, right? And fundamentally, we're in a situation where, I don't know. I don't know how we can move forward without having to give people that access.
We've also been...
I'm sorry. And the ability to take care of themselves in any capacity.
Yeah. It seems like the response so far has been, at least visibly, it looks like they just kind of want to capitalize on it, of course. I mean, there were so many politicians getting caught, nothing happened, of course. They didn't get penalized, but they got caught with either insider trading or preventing PPE from hitting certain places. I think New York is actually implementing like $2,000 to $10,000 fines to people that travel between state lines and shit. And it's just like, it took us how many months?
Investing in certain drug companies and are bidding against these companies involved, shorting on stocks and doing things like that, where you already know it's going to be a bigger disaster than everybody else, and then you take literally, right? You throw your money behind it ending up in a disaster, right? Like, there's all sorts of weird.
And for the contract bids that the pharmaceutical companies did have to create the vaccine, they're still allowing them to keep the patents for it. So God knows how much they're going to charge at the other end of this pandemic. Like, only finally get things together.
And that's when really it comes down to the government and the role that the government plays and the politicians play, because they're the ones that are going to be writing the necessary legislation to push into motion the necessary crisis funding that we have to be able to provide vaccines to your entire population. And that's not impossible. That's actually very sustainable. And that is something that, in terms of disaster spending, that this country does have the capability of having. It's just like, you need the people still to be able to mobilize those funds, right? Like, we have that money, but when you don't have direction and when you don't have leadership and coordination and management, then it's kind of impossible to be able to even make the right calls when they're right there staring you in the face, right? And we're not able to do that. Like, we're not able to take money away from things that are not essential, that we're spending more taxpayer dollars on, and redirect them to our own our own people. And part of that is that so much of our money, taxpayer dollars, do go to funding imperialism, right? And actively supporting, whether it's like the apartheid regime of Israel and occupation of Palestinian territories, or, like other more, like broader context too of how money is spent to just inflict pain and violence and uphold a lot of powerful systems, right? And I think we don't realize that, like, where our money is going. And we could definitely take some of that away just for now, right? And put it towards our own people. Why don't we have swabs, right? Why don't we have these why don't we have more ventilators? And I don't know why we can't seem to realize that doesn't mean that they don't have the resources. They just don't want to, right?
Oh, yeah.
We're the richest fucking country. They just don't want to.
No, of course not.
Like, we have the money.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that I've been like screaming about since this shit started. But like, the police have been the only service to have their budget increase during the pandemic. We had U-Hauls for fucking morgues in New York. Like, I still don't understand how that doesn't raise any flags to some people.
Well, but I think that's where it comes back to individualism. That things like the police are about individual safety, right? Very much so about individual protections, because you can't even rely on your own community and your own family to keep you safe. You need that third party to come into your community and inflict all the stuff on you, telling you you're safe, right? That's so individualistic. Well, like, we are so weird even about having like someone from the neighborhood next door coming into our neighborhood, and we're like, we are going to vet the hell out of everything that this person is, right? There's no way we would intrinsically, like, if given the chance, to never structure police the way that they've been structured in American society, that we would probably create a system like this. And policing inherently is a Western value, right? Like, that's where they emerge from. And when you have colonization, that's what happens. You spread a lot of these oppressive values that are part of your society and force them onto others, and then they can't, they spend their lifetime, as in decades and centuries, getting gum off their shoe, basically.
So now that like you study like Western medicine, and you've also lived on like mostly on the Eastern Hemisphere, do you see any like limitations to Western medicine as compared to Eastern medicine, as far as like infectious diseases and just like regular care, period?
Yeah, well, yes and no. So it depends on which discipline, right? So something like infectious diseases, I think it's very much about, when you're taking care of patients, at least, it is very dependent and reliant on having these life-saving vaccines and antibiotics. And all of that largely is a development of Western medicine, but not because they're just smarter or more capable, but just because they, took everything from our countries and put it back into their own countries. And of course, you're going to have all the money in the world to do the medical innovation that you need, right? So that's why Western medicine's where it's at. But on the other hand, I can't say that there's anything in Western medicine that resembles the holistic and general structuring of Eastern medicine, in that they do take into account, for example, with mental health, that they don't have to, just diagnose you and pathologize you, but and rely on medications or over rely on medications, but they do have to acknowledge some of the external factors that govern your society that might be inflicting pain and violence on you, and you're not, quote unquote, crazy, right? That everything you're going through, including the trauma and the depression and the PTSD and all of that, or all the physical manifestations of that, or you're just experiencing intergenerational trauma, right? Like, those are all real things. But now I think that's what us redefining healthcare and medicine has led to, that we're in these spaces now, and we're changing what it means to practice science and medicine, and we're bringing those principles in with us. And I think then we're able to combine, basically take back what was, basically rightfully ours in the innovation, right? Like, we really started the innovation, right? When you think about the roots of science, math, and medicine, they came in our societies. We created these surgical procedures. We came up with all of that, right? And then something happened. And then we stopped for 500 years, right? And then someone told us, 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, that like, you can start again, right? And they have how many centuries on us at that point? And we never account for that. And honestly, given all of that historical timeline, we are doing a hell of a lot better. Right? We are killing it. Like, look at our damn communities, right? Like, we were not, we were underdogs, right? And we're still in here in their spaces, right? Reclaiming our narrative and reclaiming our own techniques and doing the best we can for our communities with it, right? So given that, I think, we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves.
Yeah, that is very nice to hear, honestly. I mean, coming from, my family has a history of of mental health illnesses and other illnesses. But growing up, I've always been kind of weirded out by, every diagnosis seems to be like, here, take some pills, and anybody that I've seen going through depression or whatever issue that they were going through, the pills never really seemed to do anything. It kind of just numbed them. And like, I used to always think that was weird. And then, the more I learn, the more I get older, and I learn about things like class reductionism. And it sounds like I'm trying to tie in a lot of absurd shit, but, we don't really observe illnesses. I don't think that in America we observe illnesses the way that we should. Like, we don't take into account people's experiences based on race, we tend to view everything very like, there's the very popular narrative.
Lens.
We don't see color. And it's like,
it's just through the white lens, right? It's whatever exactly. The white experience is. We look at everyone through the white lens.
Right. Yeah. And it's insane because that doesn't apply, and it doesn't apply. You can't just fix that with a clinical diagnosis. Like, there is something more to someone's well-being than just that individual. Like, I think it does tie into history, how communities have been treated throughout history. And yes, I just think it's interesting that, like, you mentioned holistic medicine, and we don't really have that kind of holistic approach in this country.
Well, and I think I want to kind of, dissect a little bit of the interesting, like, notions that people might not even think of. So, for example, while this society, like Western medicine, completely fails at, acknowledging the individual for being a whole, member of the community, right? Like, they're a part of a whole, and they don't ever recognize that. On the same end, honestly, I do think this is a aftermath of, like, internalized racism and a lot of other issues. But in our communities, pills and medication are, really stigmatized, right? And mental health is a huge problem. And at best, even when you're acknowledging mental health, you're kind of hoping that, you especially coming from a spiritual family and community, that, we got told a lot that, God will take care of your problems, right? That's going to work itself out. You don't have to take any initiative, right? You don't have to go seek that psychiatrist or therapist or whatever you need and actually figure out your problems and be actionable in your change and growth, right? Like, you just need to sit there and just wait for things to happen. So I think that's like the kind of toxic aspects of collectivism, right? Where sometimes we do martyr ourselves because that is ultimate collectivism, right? We will kill ourselves trying to take care of our communities and sometimes please our communities a bit too much. And especially if patriarchy and misogyny are involved, then you will quite literally kill yourself rather than dishonor your community. And all of that is toxic, right? And that's toxic parts of our culture. And I think we're kind of realizing that there's collectivism inherently, I like to call it collectivism 2.0, where it's like taking what it's really about, right? Those community-oriented ideals that make us who we are and make us resilient and persevere. And then realizing that the thing that we've realized coming here is that we are able to reclaim power, right? Because individualism emerges from power. That's why we don't have a lot of that, right? Because how long has it been stripped from us to where we've inherently had to resort to collectivist societies because we can't be alone because we would be killed, right? Like, we can't survive anything alone. And now we come here and we're like, oh, wait, if I'm doing my thing and working up the ladder of, like, racial justice and equity, and I get in a position where I can, position myself into some kind of power, right? You realize that you become a little bit more individualistic. You start thinking about sustaining yourself and your mental health. And that's when those self-empowerment things come, when you have even been given the right to think of yourself as an individual, right? And oppression doesn't do that to you. That we are everything. Everything we are is defined by our community. Everything, right? I don't have the right to, like, sleep at night and not think about, like, how I'm living and existing and what work I'm doing is intrinsically affecting my community, right? I just can't not do that. And I think white people can because they've been in positions of power and privilege for a long time, right? Where their positionality is them and their nuclear family, right? At best. And it's weird when you think about it, but I think we're kind of reclaiming that little bit and taking that power away. And we've created collectivism 2.0, and that's kind of what decolonized mental health is now, and decolonized medicine is, where, we're taking the tools that we have with scientific evidence and research and innovation, right? Because that's something that we need to be doing to push our, like, global humanity forward. But we're channeling, recognizing, something as simple as racism in itself, right, creates a lot of these diseases. That when you're inflicting that level of oppression and violence and trauma onto someone, it's going to have physical manifestations, and over generations, it will be passed down through their genes, right? Just like viruses evolve, same thing. And like everything you are is a product of nature and nurture, right? Your genetics and your external environment and how it molded you. And it's a lot of nurture. And nurture is a big part of, oppression is a big part of nurture for our communities. And we don't get really nurtured, right? We get abused. And you come out of that, and generations after, of course, you're going to see manifestations of bad health, right? We've been in bad health for a long time. Like, if you think about the core of it, we haven't been given the right to exist, right? Truly exist and take care of ourselves, because we're so focused on fighting white supremacy, right? Generations and centuries. Like, when have we truly allowed to be healthy, right? And they've been healthy for a long time, right? And when you get to today, and you see Black and Indigenous and Latino communities dying at 3 to 4 times higher rates than white people because of COVID-19, and we say, oh, it's just intrinsic biological differences between races, without acknowledging that there's some races that have been decimated over centuries, and that's the biological difference, I guess, that whatever came out wasn't perfect anymore, right? And you took something and you inflicted all of this violence on someone who's intrinsically the same, right? Like, race is a social construct in that there's nothing inherently in our genes that makes us more susceptible, you know what I mean, to COVID-19, right? That's very much especially when it comes to race, age and stuff is a different factor, right? But race, there's nothing inherent about that. It's just that some of us exist in conditions that are primed for bad health.
Yeah. Yeah, instead of kisses, we get kicked. Exactly.
So, you speak about individualism a lot, and how it's it's the leading cause to our demise currently. And does that fall into institutions as well? Because I feel like the World Health Organization and the CDC, I think that if they're more decentralized, I think there would be a better job at controlling this pandemic. Because I've read every single CDC announcement about how to when to wear masks, when to not wear masks, and it's pretty contradictory. So I'm just saying. So I was just wondering if you have any specific critiques about how the World Health Organization or the CDC handled this.
So I think a lot of that is actually coming out of some, the general public probably lacking, access to these spaces where it's broken down, how science progresses in a pandemic, right? I think that has been the scientific community sometimes is not the most accessible, given the intellectual jargon that we use and things like that we're not necessarily, having to break this stuff down for people. But what's really happening right now is a natural process of science. And to us, it's something that's very, 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 very common. And the CDC is actually a perfect, kind of beautiful, elegant example of that, they are non-hierarchical. They are decentralized in that manner where you can't have a single person influence public opinion, where the way that they make decisions is actually through a lot of values that we think about justice and equity, which is consensus building. That's how decision-making works at the CDC, right? That's not even how our government works. What they do is they legitimately pick experts, right, that have dedicated their entire lives to the study of infectious diseases, that have a track record of actively being on the grounds, on the front lines, fighting pandemics, right, or making groundbreaking discovery. And they take these people and they put them into a room and tell them, you need to figure out, right, given what existing scientific evidence is out there, given what studies are being done and what we know about this virus, what do you think is the best guideline to come out of that for the public, right? What keeps us safest? And honestly, that is kind of, if that's how our society worked, if that's how our government worked, we'd be just fine today. And that's the problem, right? We intrinsically aren't actually following the CDC when we think about it. Sure, they give public health guidelines every now and then on masks, and those are accurate, right? And I think people saw that, for example, at the beginning of the pandemic, the CDC was saying that they didn't want people to be wearing face masks, right? And we're saying, in fact, not to wear N95s and surgical masks, especially because there were shortages and healthcare workers were themselves not able to wear them, right? And I think the public didn't kind of understand that a lot of that is in the understanding of that the CDC is kind of still working within the system where they lack power. They lack political power, right? They're not that different than the rest of us, if you think about it. Sure, they're a governmental agency, but like, what's their positionality, really, right? They're not in the ivory tower or whatever is analogous to that, right? Like, they're not there at the table.
Trump cut their funding.
Well, and they all do.
That's
the thing. They all do. They're all at the mercy of who's in the White House, right? And what administration is there and what politics do they follow. And ironically, America is relatively anti-science to begin with, right? Like, they fundamentally do not really allow scientists to lead here, right? And that's something that's interesting. Like, I know y'all mentioned that at the beginning with like the pandemic responses in certain countries where they handle it a lot better. And that's because they've let scientists have that political power, right? Where they get to make the decisions. They write the executive orders in the middle of a pandemic and not someone that has no idea what medicine or science even is, right? And fundamentally, what we've done is taken an organization that has, kind of equitable structures and is where a lot of us, communities of color, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, scientists and doctors do go into because it gives us access to our own communities a lot of times, right? And we've taken that and kind of cut it off at the knees. And what do? Make science about how to wear a face mask, right? What power do they really have? And then when they do really submit a proposal, right? A report that tells the government they should not reopen, right? And that's not their fault, right? We don't build the economy. We don't build capitalism. We didn't do that. It is objectively not safe for us to reopen right now because so many people will die and you will not take care of their communities with what the carnage that's left after. We know that, right? So whatever it is, absorb the costs, right? Pay these people.
Human capital, baby.
Well, exactly. Yeah. And it's just like, it's wild.
It's we politicize everything in this country, and it's kind of insane because we promote anti-intellectualism, contrarianism.
No, but dude, that's also whiteness. Like, I don't think we politicize, like, because like intellectualism in our communities is a part of our culture, right? Like, our elders are goddamn geniuses, right? Like, to survive through like such imaginable, like weird, complex, cunning, oppressive systems and find a way to create and innovate and thrive and develop entire cultures and societies and get us here. That's just, God, like, there's a lot of intelligence and innovation buried in these communities. Is just that we're not even giving them the opportunity to really exercise that, right? Really be in control. We're not in control. We're just on the ground doing the rut work, right? And we think that's diversity and inclusion, right? Just because I'm sweeping the floors and the guy barking at me to sweep the floors, he's still white. So what the hell do I got? Like, we need more women driving, AK-47s that are bombing people in the Middle East, right? We need more women. Like, what the hell is that going to do for anyone?
There was someone, I don't remember her name, but she literally tweeted out, looking at these DHS officers in Portland, and I'm disgusted. None of them are women. I was like, are you fucking kidding me? You want female fascist troops?
Actually,
that's what quality we want to achieve.
A lot of women now, given this shift to anti-racism, right? Like, a lot of women recognize how fucked up it is, I guess, to ask for, women to not be in militarized spaces, right? That's kind of getting more acceptable. But what still isn't acceptable? Looking at racism and looking at police departments and saying that maybe if there were more brown and black police, that's not going to solve our problem, right? Like, and people don't recognize that, and I think that's intrinsically the problem, right? That's through history. The white women have come before any other entity of color, right? And that's because they position themselves where once they attain the basic level that they think is equity for them, that they let go of everything else. And it puts us in these positions where, we're not able to access and amass that same amount of power, right? And it's hurting us. But I have started to pivot that as a talking point to get through to white women. I talk about using their experience to explain little things, right? Like power dynamics and intergenerational trauma. And because God forbid I say the R word, racism, right? Because everyone shuts down then and takes that, everything's off the table now. Like you can't talk about abolishing the police, even though we talk about, abolishing rape culture and abolishing this and abolishing that, right? Like you can't talk about that because it doesn't affect whiteness.
Yeah, because for them, their understanding of it is, well, I'm provided a security, and at the end of the day, if they're taught that fatalities are just part of the job, but what they're not getting is that if fatalities may be part of the job, maybe, but what's going on right now is too many fatalities. Like that's the issue.
And actually, if you even think about it, the positionality of white women across society in America traditionally has also been to protect the fragility of the white community, right? Where they're the symbol of white weakness and white fragility after you've recognized the violence that these communities are inflicting on people of color, right? And Emmett Till is a perfect example of that. And I think that's kind of what started this era of dehumanizing, Black men, hypersexualizing them and placing these stereotypes of the, scary Black man and using white female fragility, right, to be able to pivot that to oppress entire communities where you're now dehumanizing an entire community because you've made them intrinsically seem violent, right, when there's nothing in it. There is nothing in it. It's just fragility, right? And it's goddamn, why do you want to be in that position, right? Where you are a victim to that extent, where you are powerless, you are given no agency, you are given no ability to rise up against your own damn oppression, right? Where you're being used as a pawn against someone else, and that's your entire existence in society. Why?
To the point where they vote for Donald Trump at a 53% clip.
Well, right. Well, and then, that's also a problem with internalized, a lot of people have been oppressed for so long where they think that where they're at in society is all they've got, right? And that's the highest they're going to go, that they're never going to reach true justice, right? And true equity, that where they are, they should be grateful for because they've been oppressed for so long. And I think a lot of women, that's the part of it, right? We're at the brunt of hypermasculinity and violence and for so long, where when you do get someone to at least, give you spaces that you didn't have before and give you a little bit more of equality, but not equity, that I think you kind of take it, right? And that's internalized sexism, right? That's exactly what we do that, right? We go through that with internalized racism. Our communities go through that. And we have, people of color that vote for Trump, right? For different reasons, right? Latino communities vote for different reasons that Indian and model minorities vote for, right? We have an entirely different reason that we vote for, have factions in our community voting for Trump, right? But inherently, it boils down to deeply internalized racism, internalized xenophobia, and all of these things that just make us, hate ourselves because we have to overcome just so much.
Every president, as far as I know, and I don't know every president off the top of my head, but it seems like every campaign that has existed in this country has the objective of the president has been all right, to win, all you got to do, stoke some class warfare, say some racist shit, and there you go. Just make the white people afraid of the other people. Whoever the other people are, just make them afraid. And then, boom, you're president.
Yeah. And I'm actually writing an article on this too. Just the positionality that fear has in society and how the entire system is constructed to be able to create policies and entire structural systems of oppression because the fear is the most powerful thing in this world.
I'm really glad you mentioned this actually. I'm sorry. I saw some viral post on Instagram. It was the psychology of Trump voters and Republicans tend to vote based on fear and it was basically a how to approach these people, and I read it, and it more or less was just these people have Stockholm syndrome, and I'm just listen. I don't think that's
okay. That is dumb. No.
Yeah, I don't think that's the appropriate
legitimate fear.
I think
it's not legitimate fear, right? It's the use of the emotion of fear.
Yeah, exactly.
The idea of fear, right? We fear, for example, I don't know, spiritually, I fear the afterlife. I don't know what it is. I don't even think it's a real thing I have to be worried about, right? It's done nothing to me. I'm just scared of what the potential could be of me burning in hellfire.
Well, yeah, because fear is ultimately what's unknown.
Exactly, but you can manipulate that, right?
Right.
And that's what they do, right? That's what they tell people, right? And they're like, there's nothing out there, right? There's no like robber, burglar, rapist, whatever smear you put on these people. There's none of that,
Yeah.
right? But the idea that you've built these systems of fear, that's all you need. You just need to say the word, right? War on drugs was war on black people, but no one ever said that those were interchangeable, but that's exactly what that was, right? And then in people's heads, that's how psychology works too, right? You make associations. Right, that's inherently how our brain works, and you can actually manipulate that pretty easily, and that's why propaganda is dangerous and scary, but really a tool of mental manipulation, right? Where you're taking the intrinsic way, the science of how our brain works, and using that to create ideas like groupthink and mob mentality and all these things that wouldn't exist if power structures and oppression didn't exist, right? And that's exactly what that is. The next thing you know, people are looking at the word drugs and thinking of no one but a black man, probably, right? And they don't even know, like the fact that there's that much power causing that image association, right? That it's so intelligently well thunk. And that's the part of racism that people don't realize how insidious it is. It's not always, someone like George Floyd in that graphic manner as was distributed, right? Like, it's not always that, right? Like, yeah, that sucks. And maybe you need to watch that 7,000 times for some reason for you to feel something and feel for the humanity of an entire community. I don't know why you need to go through that to recognize people deserve the right to live. That tells me a lot about your culture. But at the end of the day, it's just like you sit there and fear is just so powerful. But ultimately what they're doing is taking advantage of human beings and how we work, right? And we're advanced and so advanced that we're doing all of these weird mental gymnastics because we're not that simple, right? There's so many things you can do with us and our minds and our bodies and all of that and how society affects us. And we're just we're in this position where we can't really do anything about it because people have these ingrained ideals, and nothing's going to really change a part of that, right? And that's kind of what I fear too, that we realized just how racist this country was, right? But it didn't emerge, right? Like, no one woke up being like, I am a bigot today. And, I was really down for like, I don't know, the Democrats and not the 3 strikes policy, right? Like no one does that, right? This doesn't emerge. Like, it's not like we realized just now that the Electoral College exists and popular vote doesn't mean shit, right? People just acted like, wait, what? Hillary Clinton won majority vote?
There's definitely some people though that woke up and were just like, they were like, yeah, I hate black people actually today. Like that's the vibe.
But see, that's really just like how bad education in this country is.
Totally.
Right? Like your educations systems are not just whitewashed; they are so damn limited.
Yeah.
I kind of want to boost about like our Eastern education systems, even in the way that they're taught today, our curriculum, our syllabus. They are hardcore.
We should actually talk about everything about the Eastern Hemisphere right now. Let's do that because. Yeah, I want to hear everything about that.
Yeah, I mean, like even in terms of education, like I think we have very interestingly structured education systems in the East where it is more collectivist, and in a weird way, everything is still about like doing whatever you need to do to like better your community and uplift your community, right? Everything we learn is about that. And sometimes it leads to brainwashing, sure, but like it's not for you. It's like, this is what we're going to do for you and you to sustain your community and your mom and your dad and everyone after them. And it's an interesting way of how we've created our syllabus. And then we come here and that means it's rigorous, right? You need to know a lot, and you need to hold a lot, and it's way more rigorous. Like what we expect, like I kind of realized that because I went through the Eastern system first, right? I educated myself in the Indian system, right? CBSE, and going through that and coming here to the United States and seeing what, AP or IB or whatever the hell systems exist here. I was kind of like, I went in and I was like, I knew a lot of the stuff that they're teaching, even in like science classes, like I would have learned it like 3 or 4 grades ago. I don't know, like, and I realized like it was so weird to me how almost regressive a lot of American education is. And we think that America is the pinnacle of education, right? Higher education. Like Harvard, Stanford, whatever the hell are like this elite institution. But what makes them elite isn't that they're creating the best intelligence, right? They're not having the best curriculum or having the best teachers and didactics. We have that, right? We have incredible thinkers and scholars and researchers, and we have the work ethic, and what we don't have is intergenerational wealth, right? What we don't have is power in society to be able to wield that kind of money where we can create these institutions that are impenetrable and will almost guarantee you a safe career for the rest of your life if you have the name Harvard stamped on your resume. It takes some money to create that kind of system, right? We just don't have that yet. And what we have is the material. Like, we have the intelligence, we just don't have the power. And I think we're catching up. And it's going to take a while for us to be able to wield these same institutions in our countries, you know?
You know, to kind of close this part of the interview, there is a very deeply entrenched, like you said, you know, individualism in this country that it sounds simple on the surface, but it's a very complex web of poor history, poor class and race analysis, and you know, poor execution of all these systems that combine to create this semi-fascist state or imperialist state where the interests of people of color and black people are not really represented, nor are they prioritized. And you can see that in the way that, you know, communities of color are disproportionately affected by diseases like COVID and, you know, so much more other stuff, other things. I mean, we could talk about food deserts, you know, communities of color not having access to clean and healthy food.
Reservations and what reservations in the United States look like, right?
There's sanctions. And I think when you compare that to something of a more collectivist system, you know, it's like, what is America doing? What are we doing? But yeah, I really want to thank you for that part. You know, this was very insightful, Ayesha. Hopefully you guys join us for the second part. Ayesha is going to talk to us a little bit about India and Kashmir and Palestine's history and some events going on right now.